My name is Stephen Mathetsa. I'm based here at the ALC at the Wits Business School, and I'll be the program director for this important session. All of us might be aware of the important role of water in our daily lives and the economy at large. This resource cuts across many subsectors of the economy while it enables us to conduct our daily duties with ease. However, recently, the supply of this resource has been deteriorating in both quantity and quality across many parts of the country. One of the provinces that has severely experienced this increase in water shortages is Gauteng, a very small but most industrialized province in the country. We know Gauteng as the heartbeat of the economy of the country. However, recent occurrences have shown that in many parts of the province, the freshwater demands outstrip the supply, thus resulting into frequent water cuts. These water shortages have severe impact on welfare of communities and the province at large. The biggest questions are, why are we here? Why are we in this situation? How did we get here? And how do you ensure that we address these water security challenges confronting the country with special focus on Gauteng province? In this first of the many sustainability seminars planned by the Wits Business School, we have esteemed panelists who will help us unpack the situation. But before I introduce our panelists for today, let me allow the head of the Wits Business School, Prof. Maurice Khadebe, to give us his opening remarks. Prof. Khadebe, I hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stephen. Truly appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts and particularly welcome you in this very, very important webinar. Good evening and welcome everyone. As Stephen has said, my name is Maurice Khadebe. I'm the director of the Wits Business School. Here at WBS, we strive to be a school that makes an impact, but not just an impact, but positive impact. And in fact, in our mission is that we graduate students that are agile, ethical, and have positive impact. So we focus on ethical leaders because it is very important that those ethical leaders drive the whole higher purpose, not just come out of the business school with a degree in order to go and just make money for themselves, but also to make an impact in the whole society. As a business school, we embed the principle of ESG. I do not need to explain to anybody in this room about ESG, but we clearly are mainstreaming ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, throughout all our programs, particularly our MBA program, and we make sure that there's modules in that area. We hold events such as this to ensure that we engage the public, we engage policymakers, we engage the decision makers, and also engage the scholars, the researchers on this subject so that we play our role. But as a business school, our focus is not blame shifting and pointing fingers, but ours is about solutioning, bringing in solutions, bringing answers, and bringing a tremendous amount of thought knowledge and thought leadership on this. At WBS, we take sustainability very, very seriously. And to that extent, we have now become signed in as a member of PRME. PRME means Principles for Responsible Management Education. This is the United Nations supported initiative, which was formed to raise the profile of sustainability in business and in management education. PRM subscribed to 7 principles with an overall aim to develop people who will help their organization create an inclusive society and a prosperous society, promote freedom, justice, peace, and making sure that our ecosystems, particularly natural ecosystems, are resilient. And that is why I'm very, very delighted to welcome you to this webinar as it seeks to understand and find solutions to one of the most precious natural ecosystems that is now under threat. And it's very important that we do something urgently and quickly and effectively to really deal with this problem. We know that the right to access to clean water for every human being on this planet is not negotiable. And yet here, as Dr. Stephen has indicated, in Gauteng and many parts of our country, particularly in rural areas, when you watch on TV almost every day, we see women and children queuing and looking for water. and going to sometimes rivers looking for water, and this is just not acceptable. And I think we need to be very clear about that. Lack of proper leadership and management, insufficient maintenance and planning, and to some extent, the lack of political will. Whatever the causes may be of this problem, the fact is we must just deal with it and sort it out. We can't have water shortages even when our dams are full. This crisis cannot be ignored, and experts are saying that as our infrastructure gets older and older, the problem will get worse. So urgent action is required. Access to clean water is fundamental to our health and our future. And the United Nations recognized this by making it one of the 17 sustainable development goals. Here at WBS, we're challenging everyone to really take one or two SDGs and spend all their professional life making an impact in it. Don't take many, take just one. So in this particular case, with our WBS Sustainability Program, we've taken this one, and particularly is SDG number 6, which is about clean water and sanitation. So today we're really privileged to be able to hear the views of 2 experts in this field, people I respect a great deal, Professor Craig Sheridan, who is the director and founder of the Center in Water Research and Development at Wits, and also Professor Alex van Heever, Chair of Social Security System Administration and Management Studies at Wits School of Governance. I'd like to thank you for taking time to come to this webinar and to spend your time in this evening session. I will now hand over back to Dr. Stephen, who is one of our lecturers in the Africa Energy Leadership Center here. Stephen, go for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Morris. Without further waste of time, I'm gonna give Dr. Salas Mulauzi a chance to give us a high-level overview of these sustainability programs that Wits Business School is adopting. And just a little bit introduction about Dr. Mulauzi. He's one of the lecturers at the African Energy Leadership Center. And is a member of the Sustainability Committee responsible for driving these important ESG topics. And Dr. Mulauzi, I'm going to hand over to you just to give us a high-level overview.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mathetsa, and greetings to the head of school, the guest speakers, colleagues, and all the delegates and participants. One of the objectives of the Wits Business School is that it seeks to be a leading African business school that basically promotes sustainability in all its operations, be it in teaching, in research, in community engagement. That's how the school serious is in terms of driving sustainability across all its areas of operation. However, to demonstrate this commitment to sustainability, the school has established what we call Sustainability Committee, which basically promotes and oversees the sustainability initiatives within the school. Therefore, one of the activities is basically webinars on sustainability areas, water being one of it. And indeed, as Prof. Heever said, this is Sustainable Development Goal number 6, which is about clean water and sanitation. So that's basically what the Sustainability Committee seeks to achieve, responsible for advising on and implementing, as well as monitoring of the sustainability practice and programs within the school, to ensure that the operations is basically in an environmentally, socially, and economically responsible manner across all its operation. But also to reiterate what the head of school said in terms of water, significance of water. We know water is life, and we know sanitation is dignity. And we've seen in various parts of the country what is happening, especially in remote areas where there is water scarcity. Therefore, the water challenge in South Africa in general, as well as in Gauteng province in particular, is actually getting worse day by day. We know Johannesburg is losing quite a lot of water. It's up to 44% of its water supply is actually lost through what we call revenue water. And this is quite huge loss in terms of such a precious resource, which is actually life, water as is. So this means that it's up to 44% of fresh drinking water is being lost on a daily basis, and through various things such as leaks and such as many other things. And we know that there are many challenges that the utilities are basically facing in terms of operation, things such as challenges along the power failures, the leakages, illegal connection, as well as vandalism. So these are challenges that we can't ignore as a school. We need to talk about. We need to, it is our responsibility as business school to invite guest speakers to unpack what are the challenges and what are the possible solutions to these challenges that the country and also the province in particular is facing in terms of this precious resource. Therefore, it is from this background that the Wits Business School is hosting this particular webinar. It is a 3-series webinar, which webinar 1 is today, which will focus on the water security, scarcity, as well as sustainability and governance that the 2 guest speakers will be talking about. So this is the first webinar of many that are yet to come, webinar 2 and 3. So the purpose, as I said, is to unpack the water challenges, concerns that we have as Gauteng, and also to discuss the water security, scarcity, and sustainability. So that's basically the purpose of this webinar. And we look forward to hear from the experts in terms of what are these challenges, how do they come about, and what are the possible solutions that needs to be implemented in order to ensure that the country in general and the province of Gauteng in particular ensure sustainable supply of such a precious resource, which is water, which is obviously life, and sanitation is dignity. So this is why we're here today, and we look forward to hear from the guest speakers. Thank you, Program Director. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mulauzi. And without further waste of time, allow me to introduce our panelists. I know Prof. Heever has given some brief introduction, but I'm gonna briefly go through their profile, starting with Prof. Craig Sheridan, who is the Director of the Wits Water and Claude Leon Foundation Chair in Water Research. Professor Craig is a chemical engineer based at the School of Geography, Archaeology, and Environmental Studies at the Faculty of Science. He's a director and founder of the Center in Water Research and Development and a known advocate in water research. Prof. Sheridan is currently the principal investigator on a joint program initiative project funded by the European Union. The project involved construction monitoring of 2 small-scale community-use grey water treatment wetlands in Stretla near Alexandra. That is in the Jeske River, by the way, Prof. It's a powerful demonstration of the power of interdisciplinary research in the applied context to provide solutions to an acute problem: the treatment of grey water in an urban and megacity informal settlement. He also conducts research on the treatment of acid mine drainage and has developed a research philosophy entitled "Blue is the New Black," the idea that wastewater from all processes should be clean. And our second panelist is Prof. Alex van der Heever, who is the chair of Social Security System Administration and Management Studies at the Wits School of Governance. Prof. Alex presently holds the chair of Social Security System Administration at the Wits School of Governance. He holds a master's in economics from the University of Cape Town and has worked professionally in areas of health, economics, and finance, public finance and social security in various capacities in South Africa since 1989. This includes position in the Department of Finance, Central Economic Advisory Services, the Industrial Development Corporation, Center for Health Policy at Wits, Gauteng Department of Health, and the Council for Medical Scheme. Prof. Alex's work includes participation in the Melamed Commission of Inquiry into Medical Schemes, a member of the Council for Medical Schemes, the Committee of Inquiry into Comprehensive Social Security, a member of the Mediscience Pricing Committee, and the Ministerial Task Team on Social Health Issues. I'm gonna start by handing over to Prof. Craig Sheridan to give us a short presentation. I'm hoping 10 minutes will be sufficient for you, Prof, before we hand over to Prof. Alex van der Heever, who will also give us a 10 minutes presentation before we allow the discussions. I'm going to hand over to Prof. Craig. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to chat a little bit about water security, scarcity, and sustainability, and then I'll try and tie that back up a little bit to what's going on in Johannesburg at the moment. I am going to ask your indulgence. I have had COVID a couple of weeks ago, so if I break out into a cough, please forgive me. Okay, so as an introduction, I'm going to just chat a little bit about the concepts of security, the concepts of scarcity, and how do these impact the long-term sustainability of what we are experiencing in Johannesburg, and I guess more broadly across South Africa. And they're slightly different concepts, and I think they're important to unpack a little bit. Let's see. Okay, so what is scarcity? The definition of water scarcity is a gap between an available supply and an expressed demand of fresh water in a specified domain under prevailing institutional arrangements, including both resource pricing and retail charging arrangements and infrastructural conditions. So that's a lot of words, and it's like it's got all these other things in it. But really what water scarcity is about is it's an excess of water demand over the available supply. Now, in our context, we've been a water scarce country for a very long time. And there are other countries that you would think would be water scarce, but are not necessarily water scarce. So you have arid countries where there's no people. There's no water scarcity in an arid country if there aren't any people there, because there's no demand for the water. Whereas you have countries where there's a vast, okay. There are countries where there would be large quantities of water, but if the demand exceeds the quantity, that places that country into the category of scarcity. The scarcity is also signaled by unsatisfied demand, tensions between users, competition for water, and over-extraction of groundwater and insufficient flows to the natural environment. So, Silas, won't you please mute your, Silas, won't you mute your microphone? Thanks. Okay, so the scarcity is signaled by these unsatisfied demands, tensions between the users, competition and over-extraction of the resource. And this has been apparent and evident in many countries. We've seen it in places like Kazakhstan, where the Aral Sea is gone. We know that this has happened in Lake Chad up in North Africa. So this is not a South African thing in its own way. What is water security? Now, this is quite different. Security is the capacity of a population to safeguard sustainable access to adequate quantities of acceptable quality water for sustaining livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development, for ensuring protection against waterborne pollution and water-related disasters, and for preserving ecosystems in a climate of peace and political stability. And that's the definition from the UN Water. So what this means is it has very little linkage to scarcity. What it's around is, can we access the water? Can we get it in quality that's good enough to use for human livelihoods, whatever those are? So that's, you know, one of the primary things water is used for is sanitation. And this is like, it's in engineering circles, it's relatively well known, but the sanitation revolution has saved more lives than every doctor since the dawn of time, primarily because we've displaced and we've eliminated the disease-bearing, the disease vectors for many like serious diseases to people, such as cholera. And that's happened over the last like 200 years or so. So that's what water security is. But, and this is a really good graphic. I really like it. It's a graphic of the world's surface water by region. And what this is really telling us is that Africa is hostage to hydrology. So if we have a look, we have a large, let me just see if I can get my pointer up. Pointer visible. Pointer, I'm not sure if I can show my pointer. Hold on a sec. Are we still seeing the slide? Pointer options, pointer
Yes,
automatic.
we can see the slide.
Okay,
And
there's
the
the pointer. Okay, there's a laser pointer. Okay, so if we have a look here, we see, for example, Europe doesn't have a huge amount of rainfall, which is this purple bar. They have about 8,300 cubic kilometers per year. Asia has more, but Asia is a massive continent. North America has less than us. South America has a lot, but it has these very large rivers. Africa has quite a lot. But what's telling about Africa is that about 80% of our rainfall evaporates. That's substantially higher than every other country. That's the continent as a whole. If you go into South Africa, you'll find that number is actually quite a lot higher. So, for instance, our mean precipitation is about sort of 550, 600 millimeters per year. Our mean evaporation is about 2.5 meters per year. So that's like 5 times. So if you have a bucket of water, you could lose that quantity 5 times through evaporation in a year, which is substantial and significant. And what this does is it continuously constrains the African continent because we will never have the available resources because most of it is going off into the atmosphere. And this links to climate change, which we'll come up with in a few minutes' time. And that's the World Bank development, the World Bank terminologies that we're a hostage to hydrology, which is different to other countries. So what about water? And I've specifically called it insecurity in Joburg. Our water is allocated by the Department of Water and Sanitation, and it's based on population and availability. The allocation is sold by the DWS to Rand Water, who is our bulk water utility, and they then treat this water to potable, which means that we're able to drink this water safely, and they then sell it to a bunch of different municipalities, of which City of Joburg is one of them. And they then pass that, they sell that off to their residents. But there's currently a mismatch between what the DWS is selling and what is needed. So currently, we are not water scarce, but rather we are water insecure. So the question is, why can't we get more water from the dams? So, yeah, and this then goes off well into the political and the management domain. But basically, the dams are supplying not only the current, but the future needs. So we actually have to protect ourselves against future droughts by not using all of our water. New dams are being built, but they will only come online in 2028, and that's like an 8-year delay. But the challenge is that this delay has coincided exactly with the period where Gauteng grew from 12 to 15 million people. So what that means is that in 2023, the province had the same water storage for a population which had grown by 25% as it had in 2012 or 2013. So that shows that we've got 25% less water. So then why is the water not coming out of the taps? I mean, 25% is not terribly great, but it's actually to do now with engineering and infrastructural things. So COJ finances are extremely poor. We understand that they need to spend about 2 billion on infrastructure annually, but they're only allocating about 1 billion. And what that means now is that these like engineered systems are spiraling in terms of their maintenance needs. We are not maintaining them. We're actually running them down continuously. And we've done this for many years now. And that's why, Silas, you mentioned that number 46. Actually, for Joburg, that number is closer to 50. This is classed as non-revenue water, which is water that's lost to theft or leaks. So we've now got half our water allocation from the DWS, which has to go 25% further than it needed to go 10 years ago. But in addition to all of that, our water consumption in Joburg is too high. So our average is 279 liters per person per day, not per pay. It's 279 liters per person per day. That includes industrial and other usages. It's just divided by the number of people. It's 60% higher than the global average. It's the highest of any province, and it's 20% more than the country average. So not only do we have half the water, we've got 25% more people, we also use 27% more than everyone else in South Africa. So the question is, what are the long-term prospects? And there are a couple of issues that are playing out as we sit here and for the next few years. The one is there is no more space in South Africa for large dams. There just isn't the topography available. So we're busy building the dams in Lesotho, but after 28, now what? And I guess the answer is it's not a good now what. It's unfortunately, if we proceed with the current cultural, political, and engineering practices, we are going to come into serious challenges. So we're currently water insecure. We're going to actually amplify that significantly. And then climate change is the elephant in the room. It makes everything worse. It drives up water demand because temperatures are greater. People are using more water because of these higher temperatures. It increases evaporative losses on the dams. The dams are evaporating far more water than they would. Our dams are also not great dams. They're typically shallow, which means they've got a very large surface area for not much depth. It's exactly what you don't want to be doing, storing your water in a dam that looks like that. And then this drought and this temperature play out. But actually, the other thing is that flooding poses a very real risk of destroying infrastructure, which includes dams, the water treatment works, the wastewater treatment plants, and all the associated infrastructure. And we've seen that play out in KZN and 2 or 3 years ago, where you still can't actually use the beach in most of these areas because of the fact that the wastewater treatment plants were destroyed. This is some stats from the FAO, which is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. And that they're very involved with water, primarily because agriculture is your largest consumer. What they have is they have something, we were speaking about SDG 6. I live in SDG 6 entirely. SDG 6.4.2 is about water stress, and our metrics are not looking good. Every year, we increase the water stress on our society. So what we're seeing is in 2020, which is the last year that data is available for, we're at 65% water stress. This is significant, and it's getting worse. This is not getting better. It's substantially worse now than it was in 2020. So what is the revolution needed for sustainability? And for me, these points are how I think that we need to change. The one is we need real shifts in economics. What is the true value of potable water? Is it 17 Rand per 1,000 liters, or is it 17 Rand per 5 liters? And as people with gardens, you think, oh my word, 17 Rand per 5 liters, my garden would die. Yes, it would. But when there's no water in your taps, you're paying that to drink water, which you walk down to the spa to buy in a 5 liter can. So there's double values at play. And the reality is that 17 Rand per liter is probably way too cheap for the good quality potable water we need. Also, the only way for us to use water sustainability is for us to start with reclamation. And reclamation means we treat our sewage and we put it directly back into our freshwater systems. Now, there's a lot of psychological work that needs to be done to get our minds around this, but this takes away the stress of needing new dams. And this is the only way long-term we are going to come over the 2028 challenge, because our population projections are substantially more than 70 million people. So once we've got this next dam and there are no more dams left, then what? And that then what is a very real question, and it's a significant challenge. However, if we were to recycle all our water rather than letting the sewage go untreated into our dams, and we saw this as the resource that was valuable, it would actually be able to be reused. But what it does need is it needs quite a lot of research to understand 21st century compounds. So when you do this type of stuff, you often start to concentrate things up that are not taken out of the water. And we're not looking for those things currently. And I'm talking about things like hormones, estrogenic compounds, pharmaceuticals. Our wastewater treatment plants are not designed to take that out currently. So we need to make sure that if we follow these strategies, they will remove them, because they will upcycle these till the point that they are highly toxic. And lastly, I think we need a major refocusing by society on the value of water and around the reuse of water. This is critical because without it, we're all in serious trouble. Long-term sustainability, and this is my last slide. I believe long-term sustainability is only achievable if we can safely reclaim water. And this is not a South African perspective. I think this is a global perspective. it's only achievable if we revisit our value systems and rethink the value of water. And the third thing is, I believe this is only achievable if the state commits to supporting this vision. And the state is a very complex organ, and I'm very aware of it. But when the state commits, or when states commit to doing things, miracles happen. And I use the example, we can put a man on the moon. Why can we not treat our sewage properly? So thank you very much. I'm going to unshare my screen and we'll move on. Let me just stop share. There we go.
Thank you, Prof. Craig. I'm going to hand over to Prof. Alex to give us his short presentation. Prof. Alex.
Thank you. Given the previous presentation, a large part of what I want to discuss is, which deals with governance and accountability frameworks, is primarily conceptual in nature. And it will be better, because it's a complex topic, is to go through it without a PowerPoint to really relate it very specifically to this problem. Now, you might say, what does somebody in social security have to do with water and systems? Well, the reality is that health systems, social security systems, and many other arrangements are large sort of government systems, deal with very complex problems that require the establishment of institutional frameworks that need to deal with many moving parts. And you get the overall frameworks wrong, and you will have very poor results at the end of the day. And water systems involve very, very complex systems, many moving parts, a multi-level government system, multiple ways of financing and funding aspects of the system, and many, many players that are involved. And so the first issue is to understand what the term governance normally applies to. You might think of it in terms of corporate governance, but in fact, it's when the term is used on its own, it is referring to essentially the equivalent of politics, a way of connecting society to the social decisions that need to be made. So one way of understanding it is to say that these are institutional frameworks. Governance refers to institutional frameworks that have a public value objective behind them. And so governance frameworks are essentially the ways of organizing the way the state potentially operates, and many private actors operate to achieve a specific public value objective. Now, institutional frameworks include legislative frameworks. They include public entities such as government departments, which must make policy. They include organizations and departments with operational responsibilities. It includes regulators, and it includes private actors as well. And when you're dealing with multiple moving parts in a system, the danger is that you set up the governance framework in such a way that you get bad results. Basically, the system doesn't articulate well, it fails to be properly streamlined, and has certain parts of it that have weak accountability structures that result in them failing. So some parts might work, other parts don't work well. Some of this may be because certain decisions are over-centralized, and they shouldn't be. They need to refer this decision-making down to a lower level of the system. But if you do that, then you've also got to have an accountability framework at that level of the system to ensure that people stick to their mandate. So when you look at the water system that we have in South Africa and the problems we're dealing with, and I'll specifically focus on Gauteng, because there are many things that are similar to the failure in the water systems that apply to other areas. Gauteng has a specific difficulty or challenge in that its population is increasing by 15 to 20% every 10 years. And that means that if you are static in your response to a complex problem, you are going to fall apart. The other issue is that countries and systems have to deal with the concentration of populations. So Gauteng, the large metros, involve very significant concentrations of population. These are people who essentially need very specifically designed arrangements in order to support large populations that are living together in close proximity. And if we go back about 100 to 150 years, life expectancy in major cities would have been about, sort of 30 to 35. And in fact, life expectancy in rural areas would have been higher than in urban areas. Nowadays, that has been reversed. But it has been reversed principally because people have managed to organize cities and concentrated populations more effectively. And that has largely been done through arranging institutional frameworks that can more efficiently provide the fundamental public services to people that will enable many people to work together and engage on a private basis very effectively. So what we are seeing potentially in places like Johannesburg is a complete failure of many of these features. So it can be separated between the government decision-making at a strategic level, as well as at the decision-making occurring within operational parts of the system. So the bulk water supply is one, but the reticulation of water via municipalities is another. We've also had a breakdown in many of our systems where potentially people derive financial advantage from the breakdown of the system. And if you don't have ways to counter that or to respond to that, you will the system itself will also break down. So potentially we've seen that as well. The budgets that are potentially being allocated by the Joburg Metro for facilities maintenance in large part can be whittled away through very large staff complements that are unnecessary in some respects, as well as straightforward corruption in procurement. And then when they reach a situation where they're facing systemic crises, they're actually fighting many problems highly inefficiently as well, resulting in a further breakdown. Now, the problem with water, I think is clearly articulated by Professor Sheridan, is that there is a need to think long-term and not just short-term. And the question is whether we're thinking long-term, medium-term, and short-term at all. Long-term means that you look 10 years ahead and look at what is potentially going to be facing us at that point. If we are reaching a situation where we cannot actually use dams, we cannot use bulk water provision through traditional means, as with electricity, we have to start looking at alternative measures. But you don't wait until the crisis is happening before you start to do that. You've got to do it 10 years ahead. You've got to make the investments 10 years ahead. The other issue deals with the fact that we have a failure of accountability structures in many parts of government, which is resulting in a systematic loss of water. So part of demand in Gauteng is in fact just lost water due to a combination of sabotage of infrastructure potentially, as well as patronage systems operating on maintenance. And so you've got a rapid, what appears to be a very rapid breakdown of our infrastructure, which doesn't appear to be appropriate. So it's very swift. It's unusually swift, and may be related to corruption in relation to alternative water provision through water tankers, etc. So that's something that does need to be checked, but it does suggest that there is an accountability weakness that needs to be addressed, because on the one hand, you've got to find new water sources. On the other hand, you've got to prevent lost water sources. So the accountability structures typically involve 4 features that need to operate together. One is actually having information and performance requirements in relation to public organizations. The other is transparency as to identify what is happening. The third is that there are supervisory structures in place to essentially oversee what people are doing within organizations and to apply consequences, that's the fourth element, if there are things going wrong, or to assist in the development of strategies. I'd say in terms of those 4 pillars, we have compromised supervisory structures that don't apply consequences when there are failures. And as a consequence, it's very difficult to get the operational aspects of our sort of water provision to work effectively. So this will operate at the revenue level, it will operate at the maintenance level, preventive maintenance, it will operate at the strategic level, in that the investments are just not being done, nobody's thinking these through. So the idea of governance frameworks at the end of the day is to establish an array of organizations and legislative frameworks to achieve a purpose, to deal with a complex problem. The more complex the problem, the more careful you have to be in the design of the governance framework. And it's questionable as to whether our governance framework is properly streamlined and designed at this point. And then you have to look at each component of the system to see whether or not the accountability systems are working effectively. But the key issue that you require across a governance framework is proper articulation. So is a province doing what it's meant to be doing? Is a municipality doing what it's meant to be doing? Is it using its funds effectively? How do you get this articulation to work well? And how do you prevent national government from not misaligning some of what it does from what is done at another level? So for instance, a national government might have a big political incentive to put up a big housing project, but not to finance the bulk water requirements and sanitation requirements. And the municipality, for political reasons, allows it to happen. And then the systems collapse at a local level. That inarticulation currently operates in South Africa and also results in failures. So essentially, governance frameworks require some thought in order to streamline decision-making and to make sure that you can have an appropriate harmonization between your long-term strategic decision-making, which must be accurate, and your medium and short-term decision-making. You also want the system to be able to learn over time. In other words, it starts to understand and incorporate information, make good decisions on the whole, and implement them. And when you see that systems remain static for very long periods of time, that don't change, don't respond to obvious impending risks, then you've got a problematic system. And I would say that the fact that we've seen a system remain so static for so long has multifaceted crises that are emerging consistently, suggests that there are serious problems in the way that the overall framework is established, and suggests a rethink at that level. But and on that basis, key strategic advice, such as Professor Sheridan was indicating, can actually be interpreted and utilized by the system. But it appears at the moment that it can't. So I'll finish there.
Thank you. Thank you very much to panelists for a very informative introductory. So I'm gonna allow the attendees to pose their questions on the chat, while I also have got some few questions that I would like us to engage on. So if anyone has got a question or a comment, please put them on the chat so that we can allow Prof. Sheridan and Prof. Alex to assist with them. My first question to you, Prof. Craig, and perhaps from Prof. Alex, it's with regard to the closing of the Lesotho water tunnel that is projected to start in October and for a period of 6 months. What can you tell us about this planned shutdown, and how is it going to influence the current water supply within the province? And the second point that I would like us to engage on is the issue of economic shift in economics, where the real value of water is not clear. Do you think that there's sufficient recovery systems for water from various water use? Do you think municipalities are recovering enough in terms of revenue from the various water users within the province? And if not so, what can be done in order to ensure that everyone that uses water pays for that particular water, in order to try and get our sufficient funding for maintaining the existing infrastructure, or even expanding to ensure that we cover the issue of the bulk water supply efficiently?
Okay, so I'll try it, but I'll start with the first one. Your question is about the repair on the Lesotho pipeline. From the documentation that I've read, it shouldn't have too great an impact. The Vaal Dam is quite high. The levels in the Vaal Dam are quite full at the moment. So it shouldn't be an issue. And there are other dam systems that can feed into it, such as the Sterkfontein dam system. So given that the pipeline interruption is only 6 months, it's not an issue. It shouldn't be any issue at all. You know, bizarrely, I'm relatively confident in our national government and their water planning capacity at the moment, and their water planning ability. I think they're doing a relatively good job right now. I wouldn't say that 10 years ago. So I'm not especially concerned about the closure of the pipe, and I'm not especially concerned that we won't have sufficient water, primarily because we have a lot of dams available. This is a short-term thing. If this was for 7 or 8 years, I would be extremely concerned. But for a period of 6 months, I don't think it's an issue. The second question related to sufficient recovery systems, and I assume that's economic recovery. So I'm not an economist, but if we're losing half the water and we've only got half the revenue for the maintenance costs, surely if we stop losing the water, we would have sufficient finances immediately. I also don't believe that the income is ring-fenced, which means that it's diverted away to many other competing needs. And I think that's a serious challenge. And I also think a lot of our income is seriously squandered, just wasted frivolously. Alex spoke about, the human resources burden and the cost of people who are not actually doing very much. I think these are all significant challenges. I always believe there's enough money if we allocate it correctly and we don't waste it or steal it. Maybe you've got a better answer on the second one, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've made very important points. The key issue is that you don't necessarily, the question is a pricing problem. It's not necessarily a pricing problem. And very often it's a user fee isn't a tax, but it's effectively attacking a particular tax base. So very often, if you start to overprice relative to what people regard as adequate value, they actually start to find ways of evading and avoiding. And so these are not necessarily open-ended sources of revenue. Just increasing prices to deal with massive inefficiency is not a solution. So the issue of the water loss itself is actually very important. But somebody says, well, I don't have enough money right now to invest in eliminating the water loss. So where do I get it in the short term? Well, typically that's an asset creation problem, which is often loan funded. So the question is really whether government is thinking creatively about how it deals with that problem, because it's not going to be solved with a price increase, because it can just cause a death spiral, because you end up losing more revenue by increasing the price. And and also where you've got large groups of people who are not paying at all, right? It also links into the whole system of how you're operating your revenue base, how you're understanding the kind of the science of developing your sources of revenue from a user fee system. So I think it is a complex problem. It requires good decision making, but but you're not going to solve the problems with just price increases on its own. And I think therefore one's got to basically balance with a number of other strategies, including how to finance them more effectively.
Thank you, Prof. We have one question from one of the attendees. The question reads as follows: what role can communities or households play in contributing to solution for this? Relying on government and utilities to solve this on their own seem a risky strategy at best. Are there forms of insight intelligence or even data at the house level that can be brought to bear to help in this way? How can communities take more active partnership in the process? Perhaps any one of you guys want to take this question?
I think this might be a technical question to answer, because I think that this is one of the areas where governments, where public interventions are extremely important to provide the baseline water. So you don't want to eliminate it, but it doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities. But some of these issues like rainwater collection and JoJo tanks and things like that can be used as a measure of resilience, household resilience in the case of water support. I put in a borehole personally and at a rainwater system and have a local, but many communities aren't going to be able to afford that, and that doesn't solve the long-term problem. So I think that we can't avoid having to get the governance framework for water provision to work properly from all levels, and to understand where it's failing. So I think that households can do something, but they can't solve the systemic problems. I would think you've got to have everybody doing their job, and government has to be the main contributor to sustainability. And I think that the issue of reusing water does become a major issue, but if there is a significant time factor in the investment in that, then you've got to think well ahead of when you need that to be your core, one of your key interventions. And if we're not doing so, we will be in trouble 10 years from now.
Yeah, I agree. From the water provision perspective, we need to be very careful because water is extremely easily contaminated and it can become quite hazardous with very little input on anyone's part. So at some point, you want the state to own that liability rather than you own that yourself. But at a community level, for me, there are two things that immediately spring to mind. Across Johannesburg currently, there are many civil activist community networks that are springing up. There are many WhatsApp groups and there are many people who are agitating at multiple levels to get their leaks fixed in their areas. And I've seen this. I'm on some of these WhatsApp groups. I don't participate very much in them. I prefer to observe because I think it's a very interesting to get the sense of what's going on with most people. So that's the one. And the second one is, and it's the story of my life. As a kid, I will give my age away to those of you who don't know. I'm 47. I was born in 1977. I was in grade 1 in 1983 when we had a major drought. It was a very large El Nino event. And people came to my school and they taught me all about saving water and reusing it in the garden for all sorts of things. That had a critical impact on me as a person towards saving water as a lifelong way of being. That's how we as communities do that. We need to start getting back on this idea of we've got to be careful with this resource. If we see leaks, we've got to report them. Doesn't matter what the state is doing, whether they just let the water run out. At a personal level, every one of us in every community has to take responsibility for our own usage. And I think that's critical that we all start to accept that responsibility because that's how we do this. It's one tap at a time. Sorry, I don't mean to preach.
Thank you, Prof. While you are still on the issue of community involvement and activities, I just want us to unpack the issue of water quality. We've seen several incidents where people, even at the household level, are impacted, and in some worst case scenarios where lives were lost, take into consideration the issue that happened at one of the communities in Pretoria. I think it's Hammanskraal. So from at the community level, what do you think are some of the issues that we can be able to implement in order to ensure that we safeguard ourselves against the water quality related issues?
Okay, so there's a couple of things that happen. Like when you see a water quality reading, they will typically be looking at, I am speaking, yes. They will typically give you a result for something called E. coli. E. coli is an indicator organism that tells you that there's fecal matter in your water, i.e. there's poo in your water. It's come through somehow. Fecal matter is what makes us ill, okay? So it's not E. coli. Some E. coli is pathogenic, but a lot of E. coli is not. So E. coli is not the problem. What happens though, it's telling you if there's E. coli in the water, there's a lot of other stuff that could very well be in the water, such as cholera. Cholera is a relatively new disease. It started in the 1820s in India, and it spread around the world, and it had an enormous impact across every society that it reached. In fact, it actually spurred the sanitation revolution. But it's still affecting people today because people don't know how to protect themselves. And my father actually worked in a bank his whole life, and he said to me, how do I ensure my water is safe? What do I do about it? And the answer is quite simple. There's two things you can do for bacterial contamination or fecal matter contamination. You either boil the water for an extended period of time. So it's not just stick it in the kettle and boil it. That does most of the job, but you still have some residual risk. You need to boil it for about 5 minutes. And people don't like doing that because the water tastes a bit flat afterwards. The second option you have is to add a teaspoon of bleach, unscented bleach. It has to not be smelly like potpourri or anything, to 20 liters of water. That will kill everything. But again, it doesn't taste very nice. So if you are feeling insecure or vulnerable, you don't have a lot of options that taste good. Your options are either you boil it or you bleach it, and that's it. And we have to do that. That's just the reality of what you have to do if you don't want to get sick. The alternative is cholera, which is far worse. That's on the bacterial side. The chemical side is much more difficult to manage, but Having said that, the fortunate part is that mostly we don't have to manage that, because if our water supplies are contaminated, it's generally not chemical contamination, it's bacterial contamination. So there are ways of filtering it out through activated charcoal or reverse osmosis membranes. These are all quite complex. But at a community level, if you've got a water tanker, typically that water is okay from a chemical perspective. It's not okay from a bacterial perspective. And then your choices are basically to boil or to bleach. If you do that, you will be safe. That's the guidance from people like the Centers for Disease Control and also our own Department of Health.
Thank you, Prof. Alex. Sorry, Prof. Cake. Prof. Alex, just on the issue of governance, you have indicated that most of the water supply or bulk water supply issues are addressed by the state, of which you have indicated that most of the systems seems not to be failing. Do you think this is the time where we need to look into allowing private sector to play a role in the bulk water supply issues, or perhaps we need to keep on amending our legislation or regulatory framework while most of the work will still reside with the government?
So a reversion just to a private operator doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because it still requires a public sector organization to enter into the agreement on the contract. And if you've got a very poor, low capability public arrangement, then there's either going to be the tail wagging the dog, or there's going to be corruption. So on the procurement side, so you've got to make sure there's no escape to making sure that the public sector platform is stable, secure, and capable, and is subject to an accountability framework that results in consequences if people do things that are wrong. And part of the problem that we have is that we've relied on a political model in the case of municipalities, and also provinces and national government, to keep things in check. And to some degree, that accountability structure has been weak, largely because we've still got gaps in our public structures that allow political appointees to appoint people into administrative positions, which creates a conflict of interest in the supervisory structures. And at the end of the day, what that does is kills leadership in key organizations, and it explains the collapse of capability. So we do, for a lot of our public entities, and in particular, this particular set of arrangements, we have to look very seriously at how we close that particular gap, because it impacts fundamentally at the leadership level of organizations. So whether or not patronage and cronyism operates only and not tender corruption, you still have people who are not strong in the key leadership positions, which impacts on strategic decision-making and planning and operational efficiencies. They collapse at the end of the day. So we've got organizations where the results are telling us, they're screaming at us, there's something wrong in the overall accountability framework. We've got to close that gap. We have to remove the conflicts of interest at the supervisory levels of organizations to ensure that they are basically sticking to their mandate. And the purpose of an accountability framework, to make it very clear, is to actually restrict, to limit the exercise of public power to the mandate of that organization. You can't use it for anything else, only to do your job. We don't have that at the moment. We've got leakages in the system. So, and this potentially explains a lot of the weaknesses across the board that we're seeing. We've got to correct it. If we don't, almost no strategy works, because it's always got to be fed through a fundamentally incapable organization. Even the good people within those organizations can't do their job efficiently.
Thank you, Prof. There's several questions from our attendees. I'm gonna take one or two questions. The first one: is the government and authorities doing enough in encouraging and incentivizing communities and industries to invest in using grey water? I think Prof. Craig, this one is for you.
So again, like for me, I find that a difficult question to answer, because I don't understand what is meant by investing in grey water. I would assume that we're talking about investing in grey water reuse. And that typically is something that a private entity would do as opposed to a state or entity. So what I mean by that is, as a private person, I can reuse some of my grey water, but it has to go to the sewer afterwards. So I'm not sure I know how to answer the question. I think probably a better answer is that, or better question maybe, sorry for anonymous attendee, but is the government or authorities doing enough and encouraging and incentivizing communities to engage with their local municipalities towards ensuring that their sewage treatment plants are working properly, that downstream water users get access to the water? That's probably more meaningful for people downstream than us actually just reusing the grey water. Grey water, again, with all of these things, you can't reuse it directly for drinking unless you're going to go all the way through the full treatment system. And that's very small, very difficult at small scale level. So for me, I would much rather see local government actually getting involved in making sure these wastewater treatment plants work, because this is a serious threat to the environment and to people across South Africa. And I put environment as well, because it's a serious, serious threat to the environment and to livelihoods. Many people use water for their livelihoods. They fish, they do all sorts of things. So there's a lot of amenity value which is just getting destroyed by lack of wastewater treatment.
Thank you, Prof. Alex. Colleagues, in the interest of time, we're gonna stop here. But before we close, I'm gonna ask Prof. Alex first, and then Prof. Craig to give their closing remarks as to what can be done in order to address the situation. Just 2 minutes, just to give a wrap up.
Yeah, so I think that there might be a sense that governance frameworks, accountability frameworks are kind of soft issues in this, and that the kind of the sort of engineering aspects of this are the only inputs. The problem is that in many areas of government, technical advice means very little if there is a non-receptive state and public sector. The public sector has to be organized to be able to absorb information and deploy it. It must be able to learn constantly and do things creatively. It must be ahead of the game and not behind the curve. So all of those things really are where governance and accountability structures fit in. And it requires some considerable thought to say, when we see the problems we're seeing now, to say this is really a result of that. That part has to be solved at another level. It's not about the specifics of the science, of the engineering aspects. It's about how organizations make decisions and get things done and how governments are held to account. We're not getting it right at the moment. If it's not made right, we're going to be in trouble no matter how much we know at a sort of fairly strategic level about the problems.
Thank you. Thank you. And Prof. Craig, your closing remarks on the subject.
So my closing remarks are twofold. I urge everyone to become activists, everyone on this call. Like, put pressure on your local government that it isn't acceptable that our water systems are failing, but equally report all of the leaks that we see, and it's a pain in the bum. I totally get it. It's really, really frustrating. All of us seriously dodge engaging with the COJ call center all the time. But it's important that we do it. And at the same time, I urge everyone, when you're opening that tap, just ask that question every time. Does it need to be open? If you see people doing things like sweeping the road with water, which you see outside restaurants instead of a broom, just ask them, be strong, be citizens, act as stewards of the resource, because it is renewable, totally renewable. But if there isn't enough to go around, people doing that are just taking what little is left and actually making less for everyone else. So we all actually, it sounds trite, but be water warriors, and we need to just push back and be continuously aware of our own consumption. And I encourage everyone to just reduce your consumption by 10% every month over the next 4 months. See if we can do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much to our panelists. In the interest of time, we're gonna end the session. But before we end, I'm gonna ask Dr. Jenica Gobind on behalf of Wits Business School Sustainability just to give the closing remarks before we close the session.
Thank you, Dr. Stephen. I think my heartfelt thanks goes to our esteemed panel members and for our colleagues who have joined the session today. And of course, to you, Stephen, for guiding us through this hour. I think these have been very valuable insights. And my takeaway from this is becoming a water warrior and to report leaks, to become more aware of the value that this resource has in our lives. I mean, Gauteng is the city of gold, and we put so much emphasis on that commodity. It's time that we focus now on our resources like water, and I think sanitation as well. We need to focus on this. So I think for me, Dr. Stephen, apart from me saying thank you very much to the panel and to yourself, we are grateful and we are looking forward to 2 more webinars on the topic, debating the water issues and how we as academics and as community, as society, can make a difference in this very important space. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenica. From my side, you have heard what Dr. Jenica said. This is one of the many series that are planned in order to try and unpack this sustainable development goals issues and try to come up with solutions that can be able to help our communities. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your attendance. Thank you.
Thank you.